Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I have missed you the last few days. I was actually kind of under the weather yesterday, so I took something of a sick day. I did have a couple of meetings that I couldn't avoid, and one meeting that I actually had to avoid because something was happening with my son, and that's a story I should definitely tell y'all, but not today because I have something else planned today. But I'll tell you the story about my son tomorrow. But before we get into today's work, I want to remind you all that this Saturday, just like every Saturday for the past month and every Saturday for the next 2 months, I'm holding a workshop, and it's free. Okay, you can just show up. You don't have to pay anything. You don't even have to turn on your camera if you don't want to. All right, but if you'd like to turn on your camera, it is an interactive workshop. And what we're doing in these workshops each Saturday morning at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Time, what we're doing is we're going over basically some some basics, right? We're going over week by week. I'm taking on a different concept of mindfulness and compassion, what I like to call heartfulness, right? And I'm teaching it, right? It's a 90 to 120 minutes of meditation, lecture, questions and answers, and practice. All right. And again, you are welcome to join us. Okay. It doesn't matter if you haven't been to any before. Each one of these is a standalone event. Okay. So it does not require, there's no prerequisite, understanding or training or anything like that. Okay. Each individual week is its own entity. So I'd love to see you there. All right, I'm going to put a link in the description on how to get to the main page, and then I'm going to be creating the page for this week's topic, which is compassion and self-compassion. And I don't care what your life is. I don't know where you are. It doesn't matter. Everyone can use self-compassion. Okay, everyone. There's nobody who couldn't benefit from self-compassion. Even if you already practice self-compassion, you could still benefit from more self-compassion. It's one of those things in our lives that there's truly just not, it's just impossible to have too much. So it would be nice to see you. It's okay if I don't see you, of course. I still have compassion for you, and I still have kindness, and I still have sympathetic joy for you. And we'll talk about what sympathetic joy means tomorrow. But today, let's talk about what we're here for today. So I'm going to try to do 2 segments today, and one's going to be a little like sciencey, and the other one's going to be a little bit more matters of the heart, if you will. Okay, and so this first thing that I want to talk about is change. Okay, now when our bodies experience change, right? Even if it's just going from inside my warm house in February to outside in the cold air in February, right? That is a change. And in that change, my body is always going to experience some degree of stress. Because what your body's doing is or in this case, my body is, unless you're with me, which you're welcome to be with me, but we'll put jackets on before we go outside. But when my body experiences going from this one state to another state, what my body has to do is it has to find its equilibrium, its homeostasis, right? It has to get back to that space where, okay, it's not too cold that I'm going to get into trouble. It's not too hot I'm going to get into trouble. I got to get into that basic place. And of course, temperature is just one way in which things can change. I mean, this happens if financial things change, if your job changes, if your daily schedule changes, if your food habits change. Any change that we make is going to have this effect on our body, right? Because the only way that your body knows how to keep you safe is by initiating the stress response. Okay? Now, what happens next is really important, okay? Because yes, your body's going to always go into that stress response in the face of change. Literally always, at least to some degree. It might be to such a small degree that you barely notice it, but your body is always going to jump to attention when things change, and it's always going to secrete cortisol and adrenaline just in case, right? Because it just wants to keep you safe. But what happens next, how long that stress lasts, and how strong that stress comes over your body Well, thankfully, that is within our own control to a large degree anyway. Because you see, what happens is when change happens and we experience that stress in our body, right? We have a choice in that moment, right? We can either accept that change has happened and we can flow with that changing, that emerging, unfolding experience in the moment, or we could resist the change. Now, that's not to say that we have to just, okay, everything changed, so I'm outside without a coat on, and so what, No, obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but in the next, in that moment, we can make the decision to say, I got to go grab a coat, right? But if I go outside and I say, oh, darn it, it's so cold, I'm so mad that it's so cold, well, now we're resisting the reality. Right? We're resisting that things have changed. And in that resistance is where we suffer. And the way we suffer, and again, your body has very limited, sort of ways to respond to this, right? But when you are experiencing something and you are resisting the experience to that, then the only way that your body can sort of manage that process is to serve up some negative emotions. Okay, along with negative thoughts and uncomfortable feelings in the body. And as we continue to resist this change, we will continue to feel those negative emotions. And we will feed those negative emotions with our thoughts and with our judgments and with our blame and with our resentments and our jealousies and our anger and all the thoughts that drive the anger and all that, right? And it's a runaway train. And we're lucky to get out of it in the next few hours, if not the next couple of weeks it could last. It could even last the rest of your life under certain circumstances. And so really then, right? And so let me just keep going, right? So what happens next, right? As we get into this state of just being in this, either now here's the thing. Your body handles stress in pretty much one way or another, right? You're going to be someone who handles stress as hyperarousal, which means that your body gets real revved up and, fight or flight, or you're going to go into hypoarousal, which is, really trying to get quiet and get small, let the world pass by so nobody notices me, right? Fight or flight on one hand, freeze or faint on the other hand. Right now, there's a whole mechanism regarding the polyvagal theory, and I'll tell you about that another time. But essentially, the ultimate evolution of these things, right, are on one hand, the hyperarousal is gonna have its terminus in anxiety, right, which is just uncontrolled, just jittery action. Gotta think my way out of this. Or on the other hand, hypoarousal is going to look like depression. I just don't want to get out of bed all day. I just want to sit here with the covers on and, and put on some TV and just pretend that everything's going to change, right? Whatever. I've been in both. So it's not like you're going to always be one or always be the other. It depends on many different factors. But the point is that it all comes from the resistance to change. So in many cases, right, what we think is the problem, we think that it's an anger issue, we think that it's an anxiety issue, we think that it's depression, we think that it's jealousy issues, we think that it's just whatever it is. And it is all those things. It's not to say that you're wrong to think that it's an anger issue, right? But the thing is that it's not the anger where we need to work. Where we need to work to address the anger issue, to address the anxiety, to address the depression, to address the jealousy, to address whatever those things are that are showing up in your life. The way to address those is to address the resistance to change, right? And one way to do that, in fact, I believe the most logical first step in doing that, is to recognize first that nothing is ever not changing. That life and you and the world around you is in a constant state of change. There is nothing in the entire universe that is still and done and not growing or thriving or dying and decaying. It is what happens in this world, in this universe that we know. Things are constantly changing. Nothing is permanent. And so one of the ways we can kind of come into touch with this, and again, it's like it's so zany to me that we address this whole huge thing out here with a very simple practice, which is just meditation, just mindfulness meditation, just coming into your body and feeling your body go through changes all the time, every moment, right? Be present with your hunger. Don't just run to the refrigerator and get something to eat at the first sign of it. Notice the hunger happening, right? And so this doesn't even require, formal meditation, although formal meditation is very, very helpful. But even just noticing something like hunger, or something like a headache, or something like a toothache, or something like a sore muscle. Notice it, be with it, sit with it, moment by moment. And notice that it's not this just monolithic feeling. It never is. And when we can really turn towards it, even something that's like an excruciating toothache, what we realize is that there are moments where the pain wanes. There's an ebb and a flow. And it's constantly changing. And that's the thing. If we pay attention to the change moment by moment, then it never takes us by surprise. And it never becomes overwhelming because we see it as it's happening and we adapt in real time. And that also keeps that stress down, right? Because the stress is your body saying WTF, right? But if we're telling our body WTF as it's happening, well, then there is no WTF moment. And there is no shock. There is no stress. All right, folks. All right. I'll see you over in segment number 2. I got something really beautiful to share with you. All right. I'll see you in a minute. All right. Welcome back to segment number 2. I really appreciate you being here. For all of you on the YouTube channel, you see that I'm having a struggling hair day today, but it's all good. You're not here for my hair, right? But anyway, I wanted to talk to you today in this second segment. I'm just going to tie my hair back because it's so distracting because it's also backwards on my screen, so I cannot fix it. So it's like a little nutty. And I know that if I go upstairs, then I'm not going to come back down for some period of time because my children will corral me into some sort of task. So this is my chance. So we're doing it. But what I wanted to talk to you today, and this actually ties into it. So there's been so many experiments done to show this to be true, right? That it's like, in science, you will almost never hear a scientist, or put it this way, if you do hear a scientist use words like proof or fact, take a step back and reevaluate what that person is saying, because most scientists would never use those kind of words because there's always the potential that new evidence could arise. And if new evidence does arise, it could refute this thing and it's no longer true. So therefore proof and truth and fact, right? These are words that scientists tend to shy away from. But the words that they do use are things like unambiguous and strong evidence and unambiguous evidence, that kind of thing. And these are the kind of words that scientists use when they talk about, children and experiments that have been done, not experiments on children, but experiments with children, regarding finding the innate sense that children have. All right. And these, I mean, with a young infant, there's only so much you can do, right? So almost all of these experiments and studies follow a pretty similar protocol, right? Which is 2 puppets, right? So you have one puppet that is, kind and giving and sharing and giving to the other puppet and speaking in a friendly, kind tone, right? And you have another puppet that is, maybe speaking a little bit and taking from the other one and being mean and I mean, it's like 100% of the time, right? They've done this over and over and over to see, are there any babies who come out who are going to gravitate towards that mean, nasty, negative puppet? And they never, ever do. They never, ever do. They always go to the puppet that shows kindness, that shows goodness. And that has led scientists to declare that we are all, every single one of us, comes into this world with a sense of innate goodness. Even those of us who come into this world poorly developed and not well, it still doesn't mean that there's meanness and a natural sense of cruelty. It simply doesn't exist. Every one of us comes into this world with a sense of innate goodness, or an innate sense of goodness. And this is very important because this world in which we live, as we grow up and we experience, perhaps, of course, if we're experiencing trauma and things like this, but even without trauma, right? The reality is that this world in which we're raised, the qualities of an innate sense of goodness and the qualities of kindness and compassion that arise from that innate sense of goodness, well, they're just not very highly valued in our world. And so the sort of opposing notions are valued in this world. The suspicion that somebody else is not a good person is something that we are trained to believe, among other things, right? And so as we're going through this world in which these qualities are not appreciated and not valued, well, we lose touch with these qualities. We lose touch with our own innate sense of goodness, and we lose touch with the kindness and compassion that arise from this innate sense of goodness. And in the place of the absence of this kindness and compassion are, competition and mercilessness, unforgiveness, right? And so just like we lose touch with an old friend in childhood, right? We lose touch with this understanding that we all have this goodness inside of us. We lose it. You don't lose it. You don't use it, you lose it, right? Use it or lose it. But it's not gone, and that's the important thing, right? It did not go anywhere. It's just buried. It's just down in there, okay? And so, but the important thing to understand, though, is that as we lose sense of our own, innate sense of goodness, well, then what we do also is we lose the ability to see that innate sense of goodness in others, as the Buddhists would call it, the inner nobility of ourselves and others. And when we lose this, well, in a very important way, we lose our bearing. We lose our compass setting in our lives. And we start valuing things that are actually harmful to us, right? Whereas more science has shown, which probably led them to look at what happens when we're children, because we're born basically with the stuff we need in this world, right? Like just like a cheetah or a grizzly bear is born with the tools they need, so are humans. It's only when we get into this society that things get all sideways, right? But to exist in the world, we have everything we need when we're children. So the idea is to recognize what we've lost there, and to recognize also that if we align back to that thing that we had, especially when we talk about that innate sense of goodness and the kindness and compassion that come from it, well, that's well-being right there. Right? If getting back in touch with that means to heal your body. It means to move your body into a place of health and well-being. And this is important. It's not just, being a woo-woo kindness person, It means adding years onto your life. No joke. Because it ties into your telomeres, as I've talked about here before. among many other, aspects of your health. Like in the last segment we talked about, chronic stress is seen as the root of all pathology, whether it's mental pathology or physical pathology. It all comes from the idea that our body is in this place of stress and dysregulation. And things like kindness and compassion are the things that bring us back into regulation and relieve that stress, bring us back to homeostasis where our bodies can maintain themselves. This is very important, right? And so how do we do it? I'm sure that's what you want to know, right? One word: loving kindness. When we practice loving kindness, what we're doing is we're practicing coming back into that innate sense of goodness that we have. As Sharon Salzberg quoted I still have the page marked here, so I'll read it to you real quick. It's one line. She quotes a poem written by a person named Galway Kinnell, Kinnel. And I'll just read the whole poem to you. It's really short. The bud stands for all things, even for those things that don't flower. For everything flowers from within of self-blessing. Though sometimes it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to put a hand on the brow of the flower, and to retell it in words and in touch, it is lovely until it flowers again from within of self-blessing. That's beautiful. That's just beautiful. And so what Sharon Salzberg, who wrote this whole book called Loving Kindness, the Revolutionary Art of Happiness, what she says, she says that loving kindness is to reteach a thing its loveliness. That's what it's all about. And that loveliness is that inner nobility. It is that inner sense of innate goodness. That's what you are. And it's in there. It's still in there. And all you got to do is practice to come into contact with it. And the beautiful thing is, right, because as I told you, when we lose our own sense of innate goodness and innate kindness and nobility, well, it's really hard to see that in others. Right. And so that's where we start to think that other people are operating against us, that life is just this big challenge, this big, fight, a war zone, if you will. I quoted another author who I don't have the name right here handy, but a person who is not at peace with themselves will be at war with the rest of the world. Right. And so loving kindness is a way that we can come into that peace within ourselves. And from that peace within ourselves, we can then hold in reverence and in gratitude and in appreciation the goodness in others. And so then when that person cuts you off in traffic or that person, kind of does something rude in a supermarket or whatever, right? Or that person, is disloyal to you, a good friend, let you down. Whenever any of these things happen in our lives, if we're in contact with that sense of innate goodness, that inner nobility, well, then we recognize that even though I don't like the actions of this person, I can separate the action from the person. And I can maintain that person still has a sense of innate goodness. Or an innate sense of goodness, pardon me. Right? They still possess this innate goodness. Even if they're doing something that is just, horrible. And then I can feel that same way about myself. When I do things that I look at myself and I say, how the heck did you do that, Art? Right? Because that's the thing. Our whole lives, we're taught to be hard on ourselves, to bash ourselves when we step out of line. And every time we do it, every time we forget our keys and we say, oh, you dumb son of a... Every time we do that, we're tramping down that innate sense of goodness, and we're hiding it even further. And so our mission is to find that. Our mission is to reconnect with that. And in the process of reconnecting with our own loveliness, We reconnect to the world around us and to all the beauty that the world has to offer us, which sometimes seems like it's nothing but dread and gloom. But again, as another quote, I think this one's from Rumi, the Persian poet from like 400 AD or something like that. He said, I think it was him who said this, that, and he's not the only one for sure, but this has also been shown in science, that we see the world not as the world is, we see the world as we are. And so when we are, in touch with that inner nobility, well, then the world will show us the nobility coming back. And when we lose touch with that nobility, and we act from a place of defensiveness and competition and striving and adversity, well, that's what the world's going to look like to us. It's going to look like it's all adversity, it's all conflict, it's all competition, but it's not. All right, folks. I hope you enjoyed this practice. This episode, this segment. If you want a practice of loving kindness, send me an email, and I will shoot you a PDF that you can start using like today. Okay, art@artburnscoaching.com. All right, everybody. I'll see you soon. Take care.